So this particular session is entitled Working the Room, Advocacy You Can Use. And it all goes back to an incredible need for us to have presence in our government. Because what was the number one thing that came out of previous two-year meeting was we need more awareness, not only for doctors and clinics, but also enough awareness that will leverage some policy making for things like access to medical care and things like this. So I'm Sharron Close, one of your presenters. I'd like to introduce Dr. Dorothy Boothe, who is a parent leader of the Southeast Regional X and Y Chromosome Variation Group. This is Dorothy, say hi.
Hi, everybody.
Anyway, she is here. Her husband just went out to another meeting, but her son Luke he can't hear us. But wave at Luke. Luke is 18 years old. He's there in support of all of us. And in fact, Luke has been a key person in our advocacy efforts. So we'll kind of be changing the microphone off. And let's see if I can make this thing go like this. So going back, how many people were at the keynote on the first day? So remember I talked about awareness and stigma and all those things. So the number one issue cited by people who are involved in X and Y chromosome variations is this idea of nobody knowing what this is. And so it's not just going to fall on the shoulders or the heads of the people we need. We actually have to make it happen. And if we don't, we will continue to have healthcare access problems because the primary doctor will say, well, I don't know what this is. I don't even know how I can help you. Educational support, the school says, well, this test shows that the intelligence quotient is within the low normal range, so I can't really offer any extra support without understanding the entire picture. And then legal and disability concerns, unless people are aware, we're not going to make a lot of progress in making changes in that area. So the most protected and withheld information, and often it's withheld from others because of a recipe of stigma/privacy. It's kind of like, well, I don't want my child's teacher to know that he has this. I don't want even my doctor to know that he or she has this. This actually happened in my practice where they've had a prenatal diagnosis and decided not to disclose to the pediatrician, wondering if the pediatrician will pick it up on their own. So wasting a lot of time there. So here is us, the lady on the other side of the wall saying, can you hear me? It's like we're not getting the message through. So in this session, I'll be sharing with you ways in which, so easy, ways in which in your location, in your state, you can start to increase awareness. So one of the problems is, like I said in the keynote, we have sanitized X and Y chromosome variations. We don't want to call it a syndrome. We don't want to call it a disease. We don't want to call it a condition. So people say, well, then why does it matter? If it's just blue eyes versus brown eyes, then, I don't need to be giving you a whole lot of educational support. So in so doing, we fail to make the rationale or fail to make the impact for why it's important that X and Y variations have some specific needs. So why should anyone care? Because you all are invisible to the wider community. If you walked up to somebody in a mall and say, do you know anything about X and Y variations? They're going to look at you like you have a unicorn horn hanging off the front of your head or something else. It's too many words. It has chromosome in it. It's like genetic. Nobody understands that. So it makes us even more invisible. So a couple of years ago, I began a project that was a bi-directionality project, and it had to do with, can patients and families communicate effectively with clinicians and researchers so that we can work together to leverage advocacy in medicine, in schools, in law enforcement, and in the judicial system. So on one side, we have the patients and the families who have desperate need to speak to and be understood by doctors, and I put nurse practitioners in there because I am one myself, psychologists, psychiatrists, educators, insurance, policy, and even more. How many people have called me saying, I need a psychologist in Tallahassee, Florida, who has expertise in X and Y variations? Well, how many psychiatrists do you think there are? Zero, absolutely zero. So one thing we have to do is educate our medical community about what this is about, and it has to come from us. It's not just going to fall down out of the sky. Even if we have tons and tons of papers coming out in the literature, I can tell you that a lot of primary care physicians, I'm not saying anything bad about them, I'm just saying that they don't necessarily read every single thing that comes out in the literature. It's impossible for them to do. So here's what we hear all the time. Is anybody else dealing with this? Why am I alone? They feel alone even though you know there are other people that have it, and yet in your house, in your thoughts, you may feel alone. Why is this so hard? We know about diabetes, we know about cystic fibrosis, we know about sickle cell disease. Why don't we know about X and Y variations? Who can I talk to? Well, who do you think you can talk to? Hardly anybody, because not enough people know about this. And is there any help at all? Well, hopefully by this conference you know that there are nuggets of help that are being created to help you. And so your overall screaming question, and tell me if I'm wrong, is why is it like this? Why is this so hard for us? So the message in this slide is that the X and Y chromosome community must be heard. We must select a common language. We must normalize that language so that a school district would say, if you went to a school district and said, my child has trisomy 21 or my child has Down syndrome, you think they'd understand what that is? They certainly do. But they do not understand the variations in the X and Y chromosome world. We need to facilitate widespread knowledge, and it has to come not only from the mouths of the clinicians and the researchers, but the mouths of us as people who have been involved in this community, and us telling other people to make it more common and normalized language. We also need accessible education. Most positions require CME credits. I'm in a training program for pediatric nurse practitioners. You can be darn sure that every class that graduates from my university has a very good preparation on X and Y variations, but that's not always true in every single program. We also need advocacy in all forms. We need advocacy in the doctor's office. We need advocacy in the schools. We need advocacy at the government level. So we have many forms of advocacy from person to person, and this comes in social media groups, in in-person support groups, national advocacy groups such as AXYS, person to institution, getting right out there and being willing to, even at a PTA meeting, talking about 1 in 400 births result in sex chromosome variations. A parent can do that at a parent-teacher conference. Vocational and employment settings, we have a couple of employers in Atlanta who are interested in hiring kids with normal intellectual abilities, but those who have separate issues. And I think our X and Y variations fall into that. Somebody needs to go to that employer and describe what those things are about executive function issues, about anxiety, about the things that we know matter to the people who are affected. Legal and law enforcement. I know that Denver, Colorado has a fabulous law enforcement training program for their police department, but is that true in your hometown? If somebody gets stopped and a kid pops off at a police officer, what do you think might happen if they don't understand that this kid has special needs? They're going to wind up on the road with his hands behind his back and in handcuffs. Unfairly, but sometimes that can happen. So training and advocacy and law enforcement and the rest of it is very, very important. And then we have people to systems. Insurance companies need to understand what this is. And you can't just go change the testosterone formation just because it's more cost effective to the insurance company. This has a direct effect on the person whose medication you're changing. They're looking at it from a cost point of view. We're looking at it from a person cost point of view. If kids don't get the medication that they need in the way that they need it, then the system has failed them. Another point of advocacy. Other adjuvant service needs. We need social work. We need a whole lot of other things to support us, and also just representation in your community. So it's literally, it's not going to happen without us. It is literally in our hands. And in this presentation, Dorothy and I will tell you a lot about how we can make this happen. So advocacy has the potential for a lot of impact. First of all, we're spreading knowledge, and you must agree spreading knowledge is a really key thing. We can then take actions based on that knowledge. If somebody understands what that is, they'll say, oh, I'm going to handle that a little bit differently. And then networking knowledge development. If one school understands about this and they go to their district meeting, then maybe 14 other schools within that district will learn a little bit more about that. It's kind of like a good leakage kind of situation. We need the development of that familiar language that is non-stigmatizing. We need to increase the awareness and normalize everything, and then we have to have a contagion of awareness that it's really important that everyone across our society, across our communities, understand what this is and how it impacts patients and families themselves. It has to be in a patient-centered direction. So how do these policies or advocacies affect you and your child perhaps in the home setting? And then it gives us, we as a community have the power or the agency to affect change. And that's the most important thing. We don't want it to stay the way it is, right? We want some positive direction. So the goal here is for this community to go from being invisible to being visible and proud about it. This is who we are. This is what we need. No more hiding in the shadows. No more slinking away because we've asked so many times for help and we never get help. So what's the point? Stops here, right now. Don't buy into that anymore. So working the room begins with finding someone who is involved already. And I'm going to hand this mic now over to Dorothy Boothe because she has done a lot of working behind the scenes. It is so interesting how it happens, and it's a wonderful form of contagion. Not in a bad way.
And first of all, I'll say I am a parent, so for each of you who says, oh, I can't do this, you can do this. And for AXYS, I want to recognize Sandy Schindler in the back. She's a board member who, yes, has encouraged us to reach out to our state governors to have proclamations for the month of May as X and Y chromosome variation awareness month. And so I really appreciate all that Sandy has done. And we did that in the state of Georgia. I'm just going to throw this out first because this is what we've just done. We were just in the governor's office last month. It's a little bit easy. Our state, we haven't had a lot of challenges, but other states have been able to do that. And one reason we kind of pursued even more was in our state, the state of Georgia has, I think, one of the shortest legislative sessions of any state in the United States. It's only a 40-day session, so typically our legislature is concluded by the first week of April. So our legislators are not even in session during the month of May. So we wanted to be able to let them know about X and Y chromosome variations, and so we sought to some other avenues so that we could get them informed about these variations, because our legislators are the ones that make monetary decisions about funding that will impact our children or our family members or ourselves if we're an individual with a condition. So it's really important that we do this. And I am not a politician, I'm not a political person, but I said I'm going to do this for my son, and my son's actually been involved too as a page in the legislature. So one thing that's really important is to find other people in your community who may be already doing this. And I have met a lot of people now in the disability community in Georgia, and I've tried to network with them because many of them already have connections. They have some of the same concerns that we do, and if you can meet with them and actually do some things with them, meeting legislators, They can tell you some of the things that needs to be done, and you can work with them. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. So if you can find someone else that's doing that, we have done Senate resolutions now. We did have a governor proclamation, but we've gone to the state, Georgia State Senate, and the last 2 years we've had an awareness day for X and Y chromosome variations in the Georgia Senate. Hopefully next year we'll do it in the House. But if you can find people that have connections, especially in the disability community, they're going to know who you need to go to. And Sharron's going to have a video clip of a senator who's the head of the healthcare committee, and she's a nurse too, so she's been really key for us. Some of those individuals may be able to show you how to go to your state legislature and pull I say pull, we say in Georgia to the ropes. I don't know if you say that in your state, but usually there's a rope, literally, and there is a rope literally in the Georgia State Capitol outside the Senate or House gallery, and you can have a page, and my son who's sitting over there has been a page now in the legislature the last 2 years, and so you can hand the piece of paper to them, and they will go and they will pull your senator or congressman out and say, you can talk to them about whatever your concerns are, especially if they're voting on a piece of legislation that will impact your family. And they're just like we are. They put their pants on every day, and so they may seem intimidating, but they're a person. My senator actually had a nephew who was on the autism spectrum, and so he knows a lot about the disability community. Again, when you talk to them, they really want to know you're a constituent. You're voting for them, and they're going to listen to you more than probably anybody else. Actually, when you go, you need to have a very specific thing you want to ask them for. You can meet them actually outside of their legislative session just to get to know them. I know Senator Unterman said she likes people to just like meet her in a coffee shop. So you can get to know them outside the session. Actually, during the session, it's really busy. So if it's not something specific that they're voting on or you really need their attention for, it's not the best time, but you can talk to them in the session. Once you go down there, my son's gotten used to it now, being in the Capitol. I mean, it's just another environment. It seems intimidating, but it's not. As I mentioned, get involved with people in the disability community. Medicaid waivers, and I don't know if everyone's paying attention to that right now. There's a big issue in the federal Congress. But Medicaid waivers provide funding for a lot of individuals with disabilities so they can live in the community. And right now it's very important that we let our legislators know that we want the money there to support people with disabilities to live in the community, not in an institutional setting. Your story, this is what I've learned, and I'm going to tell you in a minute about Partners in Policymaking, which is a program I went through 4 years ago to train individuals to advocate legislatively. But I was told that your story is the most powerful thing you have when you talk to a legislator. And your story is your story. They can't tell you it's not. And so you need to be able to convey your family's story, especially if it relates to something that they're voting on, that you can say, my family needs this. Like, I need a Medicaid waiver for my child, so my child doesn't need to live in an institution. Again, health insurance. We had the same issue with some surgery my son needed. We had to write letters to our health insurance company to ask them to allow him to have surgery out of our state. So again, you have to write your story. You have to provide a case to them. Again, face-to-face is really great, but you can do it in emails. I call, I think it talks some about actually phone calls to your legislators, especially if they're voting on something important on a specific day. If you can't physically be in front of them, calling them is good. Introductions, I actually met my senator's sister when my son went to a camp, and she actually took me down there and helped me to meet him and other legislators. My son was a page. We had another young man and another young lady this year who were down on the floor when we had the resolution, and hopefully one of them may be a page next year. So they can talk to their senator and say, this is the condition I have and this is what I need. And now they have a face of an actual person with that condition that they know. And if it's one of their constituents, it really has a lot of impact. Find out what committees. This is really important that your representative or congressman sits on. As I said, my senator was a Senate Majority Leader, and so he has a lot of power as far as making decisions, but also health care. the person that's the head of that committee is really very important. And when we went down for the first resolution, one of the families, it was a mom of a trisomy X girl. They were constituents in Senator Unterman's district. And she is the one that was on the floor that day in the Senate for X and Y chromosome variation awareness. So of course she went directly to that family. Not to me, not to my son, but because they are her constituents. So find out who your representatives are, and we're going to show you how to do that in a minute. Again, it's important in making healthcare decisions. I've heard actually even some of the researchers say this too. Yesterday, one of them said, oh, we need to talk to our legislators because if they cut funding, like NIH or other places, we're not going to have the money to do research. Well, if we don't ever make it known to our legislators that we want it, they're going to make decisions on other, with other information. So we have to speak up or we're going to get what we've gotten so far, which is not much.
Okay, I'll play this from here.
Okay.
So we've had the pleasure of actually getting to know a senator. She happens to be a nurse and involved in the Health and Human Services Committee within the state of Georgia. And I must tell you that the thought of me approaching a senator in the beginning was kind of daunting because you figured that, oh my God, they're famous people, they're too busy. Why would they listen to me? I'm just this poor person, and so, but I've seen Senator Unterman in action, and she very graciously allowed me to go in and tape her last week. And so this is a message from a senator to you.
So tell me how you become involved with your constituents and also within their communities.
Most of the time I get involved with my constituents because they contact me or I go to give a speech at a location and they meet me afterwards. But legislators appreciate getting to know their constituents, whether it's by email, by telephone, by one-on-one contact. My favorite way is for a constituent to call me up and ask to meet me at a coffee shop. And I get to spend 10 or 15 minutes with them, or if they have something, a bigger issue, I'll spend an hour with them. But the most important thing is to get involved in state government or local government.
Many people feel that government is very, very far away from them, and they don't know how to approach a senator, and they're often afraid of approaching a senator. Can you tell us anything about that?
That's absolutely not true. Their legislators may be very busy. I get approximately 250 emails a day, and there's no way that I can read every single email. And I have staff that reads it. But every legislator that I know, and I've been an elected official on the local level, the most important thing to them is the people that vote for them. So they want to hear from those people. But the only way you can hear from them is if one another reaches out. And that's why it's so valuable for the general public. If you have a special interest, the only way you get your message across is by expressing your opinion.
Tell me how you learned about X and Y chromosome variations and about the community here in Georgia.
I learned about the X and Y community because exactly what we're talking about. I had a group of constituents who contacted me. I didn't have any interest in it because I really didn't know anything about it. But they educated me on the topic, and as chairman of the Health and Human Services Committee, I became knowledgeable about it.
What do you think patients and families can do to help promote more awareness within the legislature about X and Y chromosome variation?
You have to work. It takes a lot of footwork. You have to have the ability to be able to express and brand your message and get your message across. The other thing is you have to be persistent because a lot of times you're dealing with very busy people. They're going places. A lot of them work other jobs. They work 2 jobs. They work many hours a week, just probably like you do. But the most important thing is to be persistent and to stay focused and to get your message across.
Do you have any advice for the audience here today at the AXYS Family Conference in terms of their involvement in government?
It is very important to contact legislators and elected officials about your opinion and about what matters to you. It matters about X and Y chromosome, and that community needs to educate more people. So it's critical that you get out and you get that message across, because if you're interfacing with the government, you have to have that ability to get that opinion out there. and to get something on the board, whether it's money, whether it's legislation, it's laws, it's creating laws. You can't get your message across unless you work very hard. You're competing with a lot of other special interests, but your message is just as important, and you can make a difference if you want to.
Thank you, Senator Unterman. Did she not convince you that you can actually go? How did I get in touch with her? I emailed her on the Friday before, and we did the interview on Tuesday. So she could have easily said, I'm not interested in your issue, but she was very, very invested because she already knew about the X and Y community. Why don't you come right tandem with me on this, because we're going to play in the sandbox in a second. Okay, so making contact, it's as easy as a telephone appointment. The most influential person in a legislator's office is the legislative assistant. You want to get to know their first name. Hey, Avriel, this is Sharron Close calling from Emory University. Senator Unterman suggested that I give her a call back. And that's what I mean by working the room. You have to feel as comfortable in your legislature as you do walking into your child's school. It has to become familiar territory to you. Something else that's not on this slide that I want to explain to you, and I learned it a long time ago, is something called the 350 rule. And I used to advocate for school-based health in New York State and visited the New York State legislature many, many times. And I heard from a staffer, it's hard to talk to a senator. Often they want to know the numbers. Well, how many people does this affect? Well, how much is it going to cost if we don't treat? They want to know the numbers, the bullet point numbers. So this was a time when I couldn't really get to the legislator, so I was speaking with a staffer. And the staffer said, well, you really should think about using the 350 rule. And I said, what's the 350 rule? And he said, every time you write an email to a legislator, it counts as one. So if you have 3,000 people in the AXYS organization writing to a U.S. senator, that counts, each one counts as one, so that's 3,000. If, however, you take the time to write a letter, type it out, print it out, put a stamp on it, put it in the envelope, send it off, each letter counts as 350 people who probably feel the same way that you do. So instead of 3,000 people who leverage this concern, take 3,000 times 350 in their minds, because they're all about numbers. It's really, really important. So snail mail letters it can be very powerful things, especially letter writing campaigns. So be sure when you contact them to make specific requests, because to say, well, we want you to learn about the X and Y community, that's kind of big. But if you say, I need for you to advocate to keep Medicaid services available for children who have X and Y chromosomes, that's a very specific thing for them. And be sure, whatever you do, be sure to document everything. Not only, it's not like a legal kind of thing, but to photograph it and create news and press releases. Today, Governor Nathan Deal declared that March 2nd was going to be X and Y chromosome variation awareness day. And that goes into the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Is that the name of our newspaper? And so you get wider dissemination that way, and they'll say, what's this X and Y thing? And so they read it. It's another form of dissemination. So to create a proclamation, it's not that hard. Dorothy can explain it to you. You can also feel free they might have to decline because they're very busy, but feel free to request a senator or a representative to come to an event that's important to you. And then be sure to post these things on social media, because no elected official likes anything better than to have their name show up in a positive way on social media, because that kind of spreads their message too. So that's another caveat to working the room. The other thing that's really, really important is that legislators are people just like us. So if we go to the ropes, or if we make an an appointment with them and you say, you know, you're a lousy excuse for a legislator. I've been writing to you 350 times and I never hear from you, and I'm not going to vote for you, and I'm going to support the guy who's running against you. That doesn't play too well with a legislator, and believe it or not, it happens all the time. So it's just kind of a reminder thing. So when we present ourselves from the X and Y community, we're actually representing everybody. So we want to be sure that we create a positive impression on government no matter who we talk to. So that's just a little reminder, because you can influence the way they think about things. If we create, in Texas we say, a burr under their saddle blanket, if there's an irritation about X and Y, they're likely to just turn their ears off before you even make the first request. Be sure also to thank them for their time, and then just leave a good impression where they walk away and say, what a nice family is this? This is really an important thing. So one thing that we did that we think is very important, and it's a little bit beyond strategic, and that is to create some memorable branding. And in that, we created the first year these buttons that were AXYS buttons, but the more important thing was the little box on the left. The little box on the left is a candy box full of mints that say AXYS on it. Well, you know that they might throw away the brochure, they might lose their pen, they might throw away the folder that we carefully laid out on their desk, but they're going to put the little mint box in their drawer, and the next time they open their drawer for a pencil and the mint box flies by, they're going to see AXYS again and again and again until the candy's gone. So that was just another way to keep us kind of present and in their memory. This past year, we actually branded cookies with the AXYS logo, the X and Y logo, along with our brochures, so that when they see that, it's kind of subliminal. They don't necessarily have to know that that's the logo for AXYS, but it might trigger memory. We want kind of memory going on about X and Y variations. So we realize that they're highly distractible, but we also realize that, number one, legislators like mints and gum, and that legislators like cookies as well. So that was our original thinking. So Dorothy is going to explain now about how, you know, people say, well, I don't really have time. I don't even know who my legislators are, to tell you the God's honest truth. I have no idea. So Dorothy's going to show you how you find out.
So here's two different links that you can go to look up. Now, we've been to the state legislature, but if you want to go to Washington, D.C., if you live close, that's great. But if you're like many people I know, it's like, who's my senator, my state senator? Who's my state representative? I have no clue. Well, on openstates.org, if it will come up, it will come up, and then you can just type in your address, and it will tell you who your state senator and representative are. And they show a little picture. Maybe it's just slow. Anyway, I'll show it in a minute. So, and from that, you can go and look up, okay, your senator or your representative and say, okay, what committees do they sit on? Do they hold a really important place? Like, my senator was the Senate Majority Leader, or maybe they were the President pro tempore. Maybe they sit on the Appropriations Committee. That's really important too, as well as healthcare. There's a lot of different committees, and if you're their constituent, they're going to listen to you even more than if I went to them. Like I said, the family that came to us when we had the first Awareness Day, Senator Unterman went to the family with the trisomy X daughter because they were her constituents. Okay? So that's how important you are. So when you find out who your senator representative is, then you can find out, you know, what can I talk to them about, especially because I'm their constituent. They're going to listen to you more than anybody else. This past year we went, and there was another family with an XXY son, and I asked her, she didn't know who her senator and representative were either, and we went on here and find out her senator was the President pro tempore of the Senate. So he's really important too, and hopefully her son may page for him. Yep. So if you have that link, and it should be on your handout, you can go in and literally type your address in, and it will tell you who your senator and representative are. And then you can Google them and find out whatever they do. This is the program their training I went through 4 years ago. It's called Partners in Policymaking. It started actually in the state of Minnesota. I don't know if anybody in here is from Minnesota. Yay! Actually, it's 30 years old this year. It started in 1987, and it started in Minnesota. It spread to other states, and now I believe it's in pretty much every state, and there's even, this link probably won't work either, but it's also in other countries, the UK, Scotland, New Zealand, somewhere else. But anyway, they have, in many states, an in-person training. You have to apply. So I had to apply to it and get approved. You have to have people recommend you to do this. But they go in and they teach you a lot. They teach you about the history of disability. They tell you about the educational system. They talk to you about legislative advocacy, which is what I felt like I should do. And this is great training. They will teach you everything. Then some of those people will hold your hand and do everything that you need. Every state should have this, but I know that there's some that are in transition right now, what organization actually does the training. Some of them are in person, but there's also an online course that's in the state of Minnesota, and I emailed, but I never heard back from them. I don't know if anyone can go to that and use that. It's an online course. You don't even have to leave your home, and it teaches you some of the many things that I learned in this on-site training. And so depending on how you want to advocate, maybe you say, and I thought I might do this too. I live in Athens, Georgia, where the University of Georgia is, and we do have a College of Education, and I have friends that are professors in the department. We need people to advocate in the educational system. Well, guess what? If you have a College of Education, those teachers are going to be the future teachers. So if they can learn about X and Y chromosome variations in their educational program, then we're going to have more informed teachers in the future. So if you have a connection in your education, somebody, or if you're a teacher, this would be a great way for you to advocate. There's many different ways to advocate. Or maybe you're in the medical profession. You can advocate that way as well. But you can look this up, and it'll go, every state, if they have a program, at this link here, I think it's the one before, it actually will tell you a contact and address. So if you want to do that in your state, you can contact them, and they will show you what to do.
We're going to be like Siamese twins here. No disrespect to Siamese twins, but because we're totally not related. We're not related. We want to be related. Yeah. But the big message here is show up. I mean, this is our Southeast Regional Support Group. We created this last year during the course of that bi-directional project that we did. We have drawn from states North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, and Florida, right? Yeah. All of those people. And so we try to make it bi-monthly. We meet actually on the Emory campus. We influenced the AXYS organization to actually have a professional tablecloth done, which is now on display outside in the registration area. But this tablecloth we use to brand ourselves when we go to the legislators and for other things. So this is us. I say be in strategic pathways. So we show up at the Capitol, of course with reservation, you can't just show up there. We have a table. We put our X and Y tablecloth out there, and we placed ourselves in a place where senators run, where they go back and forth and back and forth. And so we had a trifold display, not only about X and Y variations, but also about the X and Y clinic in Atlanta, that we have begun. On the right side is my PhD student, Amy Bloomling. She is a new generation of X and Y researcher. And then on the right is Mr. Luke Boothe, who is also an ambassador, and he has no compunction whatsoever about walking up to a senator, whoever's walking by, to spread the love. And when you're there in the rotunda under that big brass dome, it makes a real impression. So this is our first year. We were in session, about to go into large chambers, is that what you call it, onto the floor. We were nervous, like those legislators are going to be looking at us, and what if they asked me a question? But the most important thing was that we had singularity of purpose. We, for the first time, were going to stand up there in front of God and the legislature and tell them about X and Y variations. In this, we have strength of community and the power of combined voices. So here we are in the chambers, witnessing. To me, it makes my hair stand up, witnessing one of these. I'm going to cry. I don't even have a child with one, I'm just saying. This is what we were witnessing. This is Senator Renee Unterman addressing all of the legislators, and here is Luke Boothe and Jade Felice. Is that right? That's her last name? Yes, Jade Felice, who has trisomy X. These are the children standing before their legislators, making an incredible impression upon the legislature. Days after this, the legislators were in their drawers, and that little mint box kept going by. So I'm just saying. This was our singular mission accomplished. On the left is the Lieutenant Governor. We see Dr. Boothe right there with Luke. We see Jade. I'm standing there with Jade's mom and also Senator Unterman as we received the first proclamation for an Awareness Day. Then we ran it all the way up to the top and actually stood in the office of Governor Nathan Deal, who gave us a proclamation declaring the month of May to be X and Y chromosome Awareness Month. And we can't stop there because we need to create institutional memory here. And you can be sure that every year we will show up and we will be there. And this is us in 2007. So the little girl, is that Jade? No, that's Morgan. I'm sorry. That's Morgan. And here's Governor Deal. And I want Dorothy to pass around. This is, we have not framed it yet, but we are so very proud, not for ourselves, but for our entire parent community. That's what the proclamation looks like. So if we can do it, you can do it. All it requires is an email, yes.
Another thing I highly recommend, which when I took that partners program, I was in a group of individuals, some individuals with a condition that are self-advocates as well as family members, but they don't all have the same disability. It didn't really matter because we're all trying to advocate for our family members, whether it's in the healthcare system, the educational system, in the legislature. So if you can meet other people in your community that are involved in the disability community, that are active like this, they can tell you what's going on and what's needed. And the reason to meet legislators too is like Senator Unterman sits on the healthcare and human services. And so she makes a lot of decisions about what legislation goes through. And I mean, I talked to an attorney just a week or so ago when I was at the Capitol for a press release with Governor Deal for our, it's the ABLE account. It's called Stable in Georgia. It has just come out now. He signed it into law last year, and now finally the accounts are available to individuals with disabilities. But there were people from the autism community, there were people that had cerebral palsy, a lot of other challenges and disabilities, but we're all working for the same thing. And so it's usually a legislator, and I actually talked to the gentleman that introduced a piece of legislation this past session about a genetic condition. And so you need a legislator that's willing to introduce a piece of legislation, and you probably need an attorney who will write it. If this legislator was actually a dentist, but if they're an attorney, they can probably draft the legislation themselves. So and I hope that all of us can, I hope Sandy may be able to do this. I know she's put examples of proclamations and other things on the AXYS website. If there's some way we can help each other advocate, and what we learn, we can help each other in other states. And the other thing I do want to say is it's not always as easy in every state. I know in Georgia, we asked, like you said in Mississippi, we asked for the proclamation. We've gotten it 2 years in a row. This year, we also asked in South Carolina, we got it. We asked in North Carolina, I don't think we got anything. I'm just waiting to hear back from the family. It just depends on the governor, the office, what's going on. So like she said, don't give up, just be persistent. And I know some people may say, well, who cares that you got the proclamation? Well, we're trying to raise awareness. And if you go on the Georgia website for the governor, it lists all the proclamations. So we have X and Y chromosome variation awareness month listed on the Georgia state website for the governor. So people at least will see it. I mean, if we don't ever tell people what it is, we're not ever going to get anywhere for asking for money or anything else to help our family members. So I hope we can all help each other, because that's the whole goal. And I know in every state the laws aren't the same either, and that's the thing. We can learn from each other, but we ought to also know that it's not always going to be the same in Georgia as it is in Mississippi or Delaware or Pennsylvania or Michigan. So I hope we can all help each other through this, because that's the whole goal, is to raise awareness so we can help our family members get what they need.
So the big take-home message is that this cake isn't going to bake itself. We have to show up. So many people think, well, I'm glad they're doing that, I'm going to let them do that. We hear a lot about that in research. It's kind of like, I don't want my child to participate in research, but you go ahead and do it so that we can benefit from the research, but I'm not going to participate. So we have to show up for this. So we want to avoid relying on others. We want to step up and be present. And as Dorothy said, nobody can tell your story the way that you do. And they need to hear your story story, not the collective story, your story individually in your state. So be persistent and relentless, but nice, and always show up, and then reflect on your commitment. This means a lot. It feels so good. It touches me so much to see those pictures from 2016 and 2017. It was a blip on the screen, maybe, but it sure meant a lot to our community. And so we were very proud to take part in that. And so with that, we'll take any questions that you all have.